Welcome to A Ride on the Outside. MMA is full of people on the inside, but what about the ones that watch from beyond? Welcome to the MMA Outsiders with Tom Albano and Zain Bando on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network.
Zain, I'm thankful for you. I'm thankful for all of you listeners out there. Happy Thanksgiving week. I'm Tom Albano. That's Zain Bando. Welcome to episode 16 of the MMA Outsiders. Zain, coming off a crazy 2 weeks of action, especially this past week where you, Zain, were on site. MMA Outsiders was on site for Bellator 288 in Chi-Town.
Absolutely. Well, first off, before we get started, I just want to say I'm thankful for you too. This is 16 consecutive weeks that we've been doing this, and it feels like every single week the MMA bubble gets a little bit bigger and bigger with the amount of news that we cover on a weekly basis, with the amount of fights that we cover on a weekly basis. And yeah, being on site for Bellator 288 was a real honor. I just truly want to say thank you to everybody who works at Bellator PR. I want to give a shout out to my guys at bjpen.com for giving me the opportunity to cover my first MMA event as credentialed media. And we'll get into this as we go along. But I had a pretty crazy and unexpected 48 hours at that event. Things that if you would have told me that they would have happened before the event, I would have not believed you. But before we get into all of that, be sure to follow the Empty the Bench Network everywhere across social media. Be sure to like and subscribe and ring the notification bell. That way you don't miss anything Empty the Bench related, including the MMA Outsiders every single week. You can follow me and Tom across social media platforms as it is growing. My work is with bjpen.com. Tom's work is with Fansided MMA. But to get back to Bellator and just my overall experience, basically, I covered 2 days of Bellator 288. Day one was Thursday. I covered the official ceremonial weigh-ins. There was a little bit of confusion as to whether or not we were going to be able to come, but we were granted access to that. We got to see the ceremonial weigh-ins and how those went down. And I got to say, Tom, being at plenty of UFC weigh-ins in the past, Bellator's weigh-ins do not have the glitz and glamour that a UFC weigh-in usually does. There's obviously not a lot of people. It's literally just members in the media, whereas with the UFC, every UFC weigh-in and every UFC pre-event is not a paid ticket event. It's free, so that was interesting. So basically, I was able to cover the weigh-ins. We got all the weigh-in results, and then we went right into a scrum with Scott Coker, and I wanted to mention that I was lucky enough to ask Scott Coker a question, and it was more so around if Chicago is a priority market, and I wrote a story about it. It actually for bjpen.com. You can go check that out on the site. And he said that Chicago is a priority market for Bellator. That before COVID hit, they were actually scheduled on the books to come to Bellator in late spring, early summer of 2020.
I do remember that. I do remember that they were promoting this huge card for like May of 2020 or something.
Yeah, they were promoting a big card May of 2020 at Allstate Arena. I actually had tickets to the event, but even or not, Benson Henderson was supposed to headline that event, if I recall. But he did say that he really does like Wintrust Arena. He liked the ease of access, just with the hotel being across the street from the fight venue itself. And he said that they're going to try to go many places. They have a lot of territories that they want to hit, including Amsterdam is one. They want to try to go to Japan. They obviously have the big Rising card coming up. They just want to try to expand as much as possible. And he did reiterate that Chicago is a priority destination. And he said after the event that the crowd was super into it. He was very impressed. It was a sold-out venue at Wintrust, and he literally said that the event could not have gone any better. And yeah, so that was Friday, and then Saturday were the actual fights themselves. So just to clue you guys in on a little behind the scenes, I was lucky enough as a credentialed media member to sit cage side for every single fight. I had my own personal assigned seat that I sat in, and it was super cool. Media row was pretty interesting. It was a small subsection of the arena. There may have been about 13 or 14 media members there. I did not count all of them, but super easy. Watched the fights, kept track of the results, and then between each fight, the winner would go to the back, and we would have a chance to interview them. Very similar to the UFC. And I don't want to judge for UFC events because I've never been to one as media, but it seems like for the UFC you're pretty restricted. You either stay in the media center or you watch the fights from media row. Bellator allowed us to do both. So I was able to go between fights and talk to the majority of the winners. You can check out those audio clips on the Empty the Bench YouTube channel. We have a couple of those interviews up from pre and post. But yeah, I was able to do that. I was able to watch the fights, but the highlight of Bellator 288 was the Danny Sabatello Rafian Stotts press conference. for those of you guys who have forgotten or maybe don't know, they are fighting December 9th. It is the semifinal of the respective Grand Prix, and it's easy to think about because it's for an interim title and it's not for the actual belt, but this fight,
and it's a semifinal.
Yeah, and it is the semifinals. And that fight is getting a lot of heat. I think heat that people outside of the MMA bubble maybe don't really know about. So that was a pretty cool highlight. And then after the fight, I was lucky enough to talk to Vadim Nemkov, and I was also lucky enough to talk to Usman Nurmagomedov. And Umar, his brother, declared me as the best question asker at the post-fight presser, and I was more than grateful to be able to take a picture with Usman himself, and that video is currently going viral on my Twitter as we speak.
That, I think, has to be one of the greatest things like I have seen, since I joined the MMA sphere. Just the kindness that Usman and Umar Nurmagomedov displayed. On top of the fact that Usman is now the Bellator lightweight champion, which we'll get into when we talk about the action. So you got to take pictures with the champs, which is absolutely incredible. We've had a good week of pictures. You had the Bellator champs, and I had Dustin Poirier running into him in a bar.
Yeah, we've had a good week of pictures, considering every picture we've taken out of the three. At one point or another, all three fighters that we took pictures with were champions at one point in time, which is pretty cool.
And had won their fights recently this month. I met Dustin Poirier a few days after he beat Michael Chandler, and you took photos with the Bellator champs right after their wins.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. Just being around the Nurmagomedov team. Unfortunately, Khabib was not there. Khabib was FaceTimed, and that's what I was hoping would be the photo. Would be myself, Khabib, and his entire team. But unfortunately, Khabib could not make it to the States. But yeah, being able to take a picture with the champs was really cool. And I even told both of them, I'm like, geez, your guys' pieces of gold are pretty heavy. You guys gotta be careful. But
it's always funny to me, like, just imagining like when you're a little kid holding that belt up. But it's like when you get older and you actually like get the opportunities to actually hold the championships, whether they're of whatever combat sport, they are so much heavier than
it's so heavy. I gotta find it, but I have a fake UFC belt around or somewhere in my room, I think, and it's way lighter than Bellator's for sure. I gotta say, speaking of the whole experience, there was only one letdown, Tom. The only letdown of the entire night was me going up to the second floor because I wanted to see what types of merchandise Bellator had. They usually have like a event themed shirt, and they literally had a thing that said like Bellator Chicago on it or anything to represent Corey Anderson or Daniel James. So the only downer of the night was the merchandise gets an F from. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just being brutally honest. The merchandise selection was not good.
Well, I mean, hopefully Bellator over the coming time, now that they're back on the road, now that they've got some good momentum going, hopefully we get some more cool Bellator merch.
Absolutely.
Uh, if you have anything else you want to add before we get into the rest of the topics?
I mean, I guess the one thing I'd like to add is, as I said before we got on the air here, I've been going to MMA events ever since I want to say 2008. And it seems like every single event that I've gone to has been bigger and bigger and bigger. You have to remember before Bellator 288, the last big MMA event I went to was UFC 264, and before that was UFC 238. My point in saying all of that is I feel like no matter what MMA event I end up going to, I end up getting really lucky with a really good card. So I'm just really grateful that the last few events that I've gone to have been really successful. And and I just want to say the Bellator staff could not have been any nicer towards me or any of the media members at all. They were really great. The event was super well run, and I'm counting down the days until I can go to another Bellator event, either in the Midwest, or if they decide to go to a new warmer territory and I happen to somehow be in that area at the time, I would definitely be interested in going to another Bellator because they were awesome. They were really really good people, and anybody who wants to get involved in the MMA media space, as they say, you want to start local. But I would say if you feel like you have enough writing experience under your belt, you could always give Bellator a shot because they pretty much credential anyone and everyone, and they were just truly, truly some amazing and humble people. And it's a really small space, but there are a lot of really good people in the MMA media industry, and I feel like the people who I was with represented that well, and I just had a very good time. It was tremendous. So
I have to say, just from my own experiences with Bellator, because always getting to talk to some fighters, uh, with phone audio interviews, video interviews. So Bellator, the translation is from Latin is warrior. I would use another word for Bellator, Rex, which is the Latin word for king, because they really are kings when it comes to MMA media, treating MMA media well.
yeah, I noticed that right away, and I noticed how transparent everybody was, and it was just a very just good overall, like good vibes environment. Like every single person on Media Row loved the fight game in one way or another, and that was just really cool to bond over that. And I think it made me appreciate a sport that I've been following since I was 6, even more. So I was very, very grateful.
Definitely. It definitely seemed like you had a really good time, Zan, and I'm really happy for you. And I'm so happy that MMA Outsiders got to be there. Like you said, shout out to your guys over at BJ Penn, shout out to Bellator PR, and shout out to the Nurmagomedovs and Vadim Nemkov for incredible night.
Absolutely.
All
Absolutely.
right.
We
We
all
will
And we have to give one more shout out to Daniel James too. Daniel James was very, very nice to me after his post fight interview, and A took a picture with me, and B followed me on Instagram too, which is even cooler. So there we go.
after pulling off one of the biggest upsets I've ever. I like you said, that crowd. Maybe it was just for me watching on TV. Maybe I truly don't, won't understand. Like I've
You
been
won't.
to,
You
like
won't.
how loud that place
It was
got.
it was so it was so deafening in there when he won that you could not even hear yourself think. It was that crazy, and I can
That has to be one of the upsets of the year too.
I would put it top 3. I would maybe even put it number 2. Even it was really just freaking madness in there when he won, and you could just see the devastation on Tyro of Fortune's face when he realized, oh my goodness, I just lost to a guy that's barely fought in the decade, and not only did I lose, I got stopped. That's how he looked.
Yeah, that's the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat, as we say in this sport.
It was shocking. It
Pretty
was
bad.
literally shocking, but it just goes to show that any MMA comeback can happen at any time.
I
So
mean, like we said last week, We've seen two championship fight 5th round comeback finishes in the last 3 months.
Insane. If Tom, I don't know about you, but I certainly did not have that on my MMA bingo card for 2022.
Not at all. Not at all. We'll get more into the Bellator card, obviously, in just a little bit. We'll get into the big news that everyone wants to, talk about, that basically they're saying no mainstream MMA media are talking about something that was mentioned on UFC Vegas 65 involving James Krause. But there are big stories that came up recently that deal with in the cage matters that we do have to talk about because they and we'll start with them first because they are very recent. They are very breaking within the last 24 to 48 hours. And to start things off, we have a Jon Jones update. Currently, the UFC's plan is for Jon Jones to face Francis Ngannou at UFC 285 in March. Stipe Miocic is out. Supposedly, Stipe Miocic was the holdup and was the reason that Jon Jones is not fighting in this December pay-per-view, UFC 282. That's why we're getting the Glover-Jiri rematch as the main event. So Stipe is out, according to reports. The UFC says Stipe is out. Jon Jones versus Francis Ngannou, UFC 285. However, if Ngannou is still not cleared to compete, it sounds like it will be Jon Jones versus Curtis Blaydes, potentially for an interim heavyweight championship. Zain, do you think this report? So we've been dealing with these reports about Jones and Ngannou for a couple of years. We've dealt with this report about Jones versus Stipe for a year or two now. Do you think this is finally it? Will we finally see? Because it's about to, once February passes, and it's going to be 3 years since we've seen Jones in the cage. Is this finally going to be it? Will we finally see the return? Do you finally believe it?
Yeah, I believe it, and I don't know if this is a stretch. So you could yell at me or scream me all you want. I don't care. But I feel like, Tom, that we are getting into the UFC's version, and I don't mean to act like this because who knows? I may get made fun of on the internet. I don't really care, but I do feel like this Jon Jones Francis Ngannou saga is turning into the UFC's version of Floyd Mayweather versus Manny Pacquiao. How many years in a row was it told to us that Floyd Mayweather versus Manny Pacquiao was going to be the fight, and it didn't happen until 5 years after its projected year of 2010, and it happened 5 years too late.
Agreed. Agreed from that perspective. To put it on that level, though, I think is a bit much because I don't think Francis Ngannou has done enough in this sport to put himself on the level of Jon Jones.
But I'm just saying this is MMA's equivalent in terms of how long a fight has been held up for so many years.
This is basically in other words, you're saying the UFC heavyweight division's version of boxing gets in its own way.
Absolutely. This is their rare version of exactly that. And I say rare because the UFC most of the time gives you the fights that you want to see. But going back to your original question, yes, I do think this fight's going to happen. It has to happen. If it doesn't happen at UFC 285, it'll never happen. And I just feel like I think the future of the UFC heavyweight division is at stake. Because if you think about it, if Francis Ngannou wins, right, assuming this fight happens, it puts the UFC in a corner to where, there's a chance that even if his contract is restructured, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, there is a chance that Francis, may want more money if he beats this supposed pound for pound greatest UFC fighter of all time. There's a chance that he says, hey, I want to be the A side for the rest of my career. And if Jon Jones wins, I don't think there's any doubt that he'll be noted as the number one or number two best fighter to ever step foot in the octagon. I think the worst case scenario for the UFC is this Curtis Blaydes backup plan. And the reason why I say that is because as much as Curtis Blaydes has stayed in the upper echelon of the top 5 of the heavyweight division, I just don't see how the casual fans, if you will, are going to be sold to a Curtis Blaydes Jon Jones interim heavyweight title fight if Francis isn't healthy. and that could potentially hold up the heavyweight division for another years. But you're talking 2 years of essentially no heavyweight activity at the top of this Curtis Blades fight actually comes to fruition. So the plan is Jones Francis, but I just worry that it Blades is the fight, and I think it makes the heavyweight division look worse. And it's not a knock on Blades; it's just currently how the rankings are shaping up to look and everything like that. But I do feel like if 285 is what they're saying it's going to be, March is going to be a banger year, or a banger month rather, because you have UFC 285 in Vegas and you have UFC 286 in London. So,
Yeah, should be absolutely phenomenal in March. As far as what you talk about with the heavyweight division, yeah, I kind of agree. UFC kind of in a bit of a pickle because, well, first of all, this fight has been a long time coming. If you remember when Stipe and DC were playing a bit of chicken foot with their trilogy fight during the time of the pandemic, Jon Jones and Francis Ngannou both said, let's get it going. Let's sign up for myself versus Ngannou, Jones versus Ngannou for an interim title fight while we wait out this Stipe DC situation. And the end result was basically Jones being pissed off at the UFC not letting him go up to heavyweight, Francis being pissed off for not getting him, one of the greatest fighters in MMA history, and Jon Jones asking for his release in a year where we saw multiple stars asking for their release from the promotion before before the UFC finally acquiesced and allowed Jones to vacate the light heavyweight title and move up to heavyweight, which, by the way, I have to give Jones all the credit in the world for because, I shouldn't say everyone, but a lot of people wanted to see him move up to heavyweight, and he could have gone for the 2 belts, but he decided to not hold up the light heavyweight division, and he wanted to take the time and do his heavyweight transition right and take the time for it, and he's taken a lot of time for it now. It's been over 2 years worth, about to approach a third, and vacated the light heavyweight title. And I'm really interested to see how Jon Jones looks inside the cage as a heavyweight. And yeah, Curtis Blades, you're right, because Curtis Blades is kind of like the guy who is kind of there. I mean, listen, he's won 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 of his last 13, 7 of his last 8, 3 straight. But I mean, not exactly. He had the second round finish of Chris Daukaus, which was great. But his last fight with Aspinall in July, that was one of our cursed cards this year that ended in an injury.
right, exactly.
The Jairzinho Rosenstruck fight was, it was something to see him basically stop Rosenstruck's power. It was kind of shocking that way. But, I agree that I don't know if you're going to sell the casual fan on Curtis Blades like you would sell the casual fan on Francis Ngannou's knockout power or Jon Jones's finishes, his history, and his crazy legacy.
Right, and I don't know if you agree or disagree with this, but I'm going to say it anyway. You're rattling off all the numbers of, how well Curtis Blades has performed over the last couple of years, and it almost leads me to believe that every single time he gets into a position like this, doesn't it feel like to you, Tom, that he's slowly but surely become almost the gatekeeper, if you would?
I think so.
The UFC heavyweight division, the one guy that kind of everybody is.
Actually, I don't know if I can say so because he constantly wins. That's the thing. He's constantly winning, so he's constantly there. I just don't know if he's, you know what he is? He's becoming like what I talked about with Holloway, the quadruple A guy. He's not going to beat your Stipe Miocics. He's not going to beat your Francis Ngannou's or your Jon Jones, but he'll beat everybody else.
It's a solid comparison. Hoping that Jones Francis gets done, as you and I have alluded to several times on this program in the past. March is always a big one for the UFC. It's targeted for the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas. There's been some really famous cards the first week in March if you look back at recent UFC history, and assuming that this fight comes to fruition, this has a chance to be another one of those really memorable UFC cards. It's going to be a while, but hey, it's as UFC 285. We're only I'd say about we're only about 15 shows or so away from 300, which means the fights are going to continue to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So We'll see how this plays out. But I do hope that that's what ends up being the fight. And as the UFC likes to do, hopefully they'll build a pretty big card around it. So
for sure. Let's move over to the Bellator side of things because they had a fight of their own to announce. Yaroslav Amosov is going to defend the welterweight championship, taking on Logan Story in a rematch. That will headline Bellator 291, which is actually set to take place, I believe, in February in Dublin.
Yeah, I believe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the release in February 25th or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's obviously a big rematch. It's a fight that's been penciled in for quite a bit. Obviously, Story's the toughest guy that Amosov has ever faced, and I think he's going to give him a war. And I actually think Story's going to get the job done and win the welterweight title. What do you think?
That's an interesting take. I might be siding with that. I mean, so you have Yaroslav Amosov, who ended up winning the championship, and ended up winning the championship from Douglas Lima at Bellator 260. And then actually, Zain, this is actually going to be his first fight since then. It's his first title defense because remember, he's been spending time in Ukraine ever since the since the invasion by Russian forces.
That's right. He has. I forgot how long ago his last fight was. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if ring rust, quote unquote, is a factor going in, which is one of the reasons why I like Story in because of that exact aspect of this rematch.
And you have some interestingness when it comes to the fights that Story's coming off of, and the first fight between Amosov and Story from the pandemic era, because in the pandemic era, Amosov Story won, ends with Amosov winning a close split decision. And actually, you have Story coming off of another close split decision against Michael Page, and a fight that
that's a fight that I thought he lost. To be honest with you, I had him losing 3 rounds to 2 in one, if I remember correctly.
Oh, that's actually a unification. I was like, wait a minute, doesn't Story have a title? It's like, yeah, that's the interim championship. So technically, my graphic's wrong. Technically, it should be champion versus interim champion.
Yeah, that's also true. I was just saying, I don't think they got the Story Page decision.
Oh no, absolutely not. No, I agree. I probably will have to watch it again, but my first instinct was the belt was going to be placed on Michael Page, and maybe should have been placed on Michael Venom Page. Now, whether you think Michael Venom Page should have had the title shot or not in the first place is another story. However, Logan Story, I don't think got the win. Now, granted, he's won his last 3 fights. The Amosov fight's his only loss, and his last 2 fights are not just Michael Page, but a win over Neiman Gracie. So that's nothing to sneeze at. Logan Story's nothing to sneeze at, but basically my point is Logan Story needs to come out against Amosov, and he needs to have a pretty decisive victory. And maybe, Zain, that's going to have the fire under him that will lead him to win and take the championship from Amosov. But as mentioned, it's going to be Amosov's first fight in just under 2 years. And I wonder, just under 2 years, maybe more on the year and a half side or year 3/4 side. I'm wondering if, like you mentioned, there is going to be any ring rust on him.
You probably don't have a pen and paper handy, but remember that I said this. Story is going to finish Amosov inside of 3 rounds with a nasty TKO.
Mark it down out there.
Just keep that in mind. I expect Amosov's chin to be compromised, and he's going to get caught.
All right. Well, we have Zain's bold prediction 3 months early, but there you go.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So that's the in the cage news that we got. I mean, we have more in the cage news, but we got to get to the big story. This is the story that everyone has been saying, needs more attention. So Zain, I will let you go into the details, but the gist of it is during UFC Vegas 65, one of the fighters dropped a little bomb in their post-fight interview in the cage, mentioning that their coach had been suspended. And that coach is James Krause, the retired UFC welterweight, now is, exclusively a coach, and it was actually somebody, I'd say, a popular coach. And additionally, over here in the Northeast, we've also learned that some New Jersey sportsbooks aren't able to take bets where he is a cornerman. Supposedly, the gambling commission over in New Jersey has put a stop on all fights where he is involved.
Yeah, this is a very interesting story. So to break it all down, this has been nothing new in sports. And we're not even we're okay. And we want to make it very clear before we start this segment that we're not saying that any of the fights that he was involved in were fixed in any way. All we're simply pointing out is
these
that
these are just the accusations as they're being reported.
Right. These are just the accusations. But what I want to make clear is this isn't the first time that these accusations in combat sports have come out. You have to remember, if you go back and do your early boxing history in the 40s and the 50s and all that, there were guys literally in the mob that would control certain outcomes of certain fights. If you wanted to be, let's say the heavyweight champion of the world, there were guys that you would go through in order to potentially make the fights that would be favorable, quote unquote, enough to make it happen, and it would skew the bettors to go a certain way. For those of you guys who are unaware, there was a fight involving Derek Minner just a couple weeks ago, and it was leaked out that he was injured, and the betting line skyrocketed for Derek Minner's opponent. And basically, what happened in the fight is Minner's leg was compromised, and he was viciously finished in the first round, and that's where a lot of people started to speculate, like, wait, how in the world did the betting line go from, I think it was minus 125 to somewhere around minus 400?
Yeah, how did this leg injury get kept, so under wraps? How did the fight, go on? It sparked a lot of questions as to what the heck was happening.
Yeah, so personally, and James Krause, before this accusation, was one of the most respected coaches, in the industry. He has a show on Fight Pass where he, gives his picks and his takes on what he thinks. And this is definitely a bad look, not only from a James Krause perspective, but it puts a black eye on the sport because obviously, you don't want to compromise its integrity. So it's going to be interesting to see what comes of this. I'm glad that this is taking place because if you noticed, it seemed like the press was pretty quiet on this whole story. Like right when it came out, and Dane even said, "Oh, there was no accusation of anything or whatever." And then obviously this comes out. There was another famous case, I think 8 or so years ago, with a former UFC fighter that actually went to jail for this certain.
I brought him up a couple of times over our last few shows.
Yeah, now I can't think of his name, but he and his opponent were told in the back, like, "Hey, if you guys were involved in this, you could be, investigated." And sure enough, the guy who was accused goes out and knocked the other guy out, and sure enough, he got
and still gets arrested, and still is
yeah.
Taehyung Bang.
Yep, but I remember that whole thing was kept under wraps by the UFC too, and they just kind of let him go, not in secret, but it didn't become as big of a story as maybe this has become.
I mean, Zain, and it's not the first time that we've dealt with fight fixing accusations when it comes to the sport. I mean, you think about all the different fights that Bob Sapp was in. You have all these different things, accusations of fight fixing going around, or just the fact that, or that might just be the fact that Bob Sapp just took the payday and took the easy way out of his fights. Pride 5, Takada Coleman, that the fact that the ankle lock that Takada had Coleman and looked like a freaking WWE kind of fight, and Coleman's post-fight comments afterwards saying, they guaranteed me another fight, and that's all I'll say, kind of raising some eyebrows.
Yeah, I was going to say the one fight to this day, and I know it's a really old fight, but the one fight that always rubs me the wrong way whenever I watch it, which is once a year on its coveted anniversary because it's so infamous. To this,
Kimbo Slice versus Seth Petrozelli.
Yeah, to this day, I still watch it and I go, how the hell did that fight A get sanctioned, but B, how did that just like happen like it was no big deal? And of course Dana comes out with this infamous line that's effing illegal. So so yeah, I mean literally that fight was the demise of Elite XC if you really look at it.
Took the words out of my mouth. That fight gambling brought down an entire promotion after Seth Petrozelli had the post fight where he said basically he was going to be paid extra to just stand and trade with Kimbo, which actually was one of the worst decisions that Elite XC ever made. If that ends up being true,
yeah. And the infamous post-fight interview the infamous pre-fight UFC 90 scrum that Dana did, which was also in Chicago, I might add. I don't know if it's been wiped from the internet or not, but he literally yells into the camera. He goes, "That's fight tampering. You can't do that."
But I think, Zain, it's also interesting because the UFC and just the sport of mixed martial arts compared to the betting of, say, the other professional major league sports here in America. And mixed martial arts is kind of the wild west because it's kind of, there's the similarities in that it seems like these days you can bet on anything, because in baseball you can bet on, okay, how many pitches are going to be thrown, what's going to be the result of this at bat. In mixed martial arts, you can debate that, the round, the finish, the fighter, the kind of finish, gone the distance or not. But I'm just saying that it's more of the wild west because for the longest time we've had fighters, able to bet on their teammates, their opponents, themselves. There was a UFC fighter, it wasn't that long ago, where the UFC fighter betted on himself and actually lost. Who was that? Oh, Justin James in 2021.
Yeah, he bet on himself and he lost.
Which is kind of excruciating when you consider the pay structure that an MMA fighter or a UFC fighter has. But I just think then, like Pete Rose got banned in the 1970s where Major League Baseball for betting on games that he was managing in. Calvin Ridley, it was inactive. Was inactive for the entire 2021 season. Not the entire, but for a significant point. And then find out, many months later, he was gambling on one of these games, and now Calvin Ridley got suspended for this entire NFL season. Yeah. And it seems like, is this basically what I'm asking you is this James Krause thing, is this going to be MMA's Pete Rose or Calvin Ridley moment?
No, I think it's just one of those things where the UFC caught it, which is what they needed to do. And I think they need to have a stern warning with him where it's like, if you do this again, you're not just banned, but you're banned from anything associated with the UFC forever. And I hope that's what they tell him, because you can't just leak information out like that, without A, consent of the fighter, and B, just the moral integrity of the sport.
But that's the thing, Zain, with the moral integrity and the fact that, we're talking about something, the health and safety hazard at this point that Krause is leaking. That's why I ask, are they going to give him another chance?
I mean, I think, okay, let me rephrase. I think he would have to make a very strong case, Tom, that he will never do this again. In saying, like, he doesn't need to put a statement out. He needs to, like, go on one of these shows. He needs to clear the air on the whole thing, and he needs to explain the whole story from the very beginning for the people who don't know anything about it, and just come clean and say, look, I should have never done that. Bad judgment on my part. I've been a studious MMA coach for the last several years. I train, some of the best fighters in the sport. Whatever he wants to say, he just needs to make it very clear to the MMA audience, which is quite large, that he will never engage.
I screwed up, basically.
Yeah. But no, not just I screwed up, like being actually genuine about it and taking 100% an individual responsibility for it is more so my thing. And if he can't do that and he remains silent about it, then he should never be allowed to be associated with the sport again.
And I'm trying to think of the timeline. This happened after the UFC said fighters aren't allowed to fight to bet on themselves anymore.
After, yes.
I was gonna say, because I'm trying to think of the timeline in my head about, did the UFC do that after that fight? Because then 2-2 would have made a little more sense. But if it was after, then not in this case.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was after they sent that memo.
But see, a situation like this, Zain, now makes me kind of, maybe it's not a bad idea by the UFC to kind of restrict fighters from betting on themselves and their teammates and such.
Yeah, I think it could legitimatize the sport a little bit more, or legitimize it. But yeah,
I get the hates that, for the different uniforms that everybody looks the same in the UFC. I get especially when it was the Reebok deal. I get the hate for how, different it looks and feels ever since going to network television and dealing with the Foxes and the ESPNs. But something like this, it's like, yeah, let's play it a little safer. Like I said, gambling, we've seen the devastating effects of gambling. And we've seen Justin James and what happened with him, because I think that was such a bad decision. The more I think about it, maybe it's not a bad idea.
I mean, this is an older example, but Matt Lindland was literally cut from the UFC for wearing a clothing sponsor that represented a gambling company. And I know that that's a very old story that has its own controversy, but it's interesting to think that this situation stems from numerous instances of fighters being involved in that sort of thing and paying the price for it.
Now that being said, the fighters allowed to bet on other fights. I mean, but on other fights, I kind of understand the point, because you mentioned that, Zain, that Matt Lindland got cut for wearing the gambling product, and yet UFC and just the sport of MMA in general, not just them, but your Major League Baseballs, your NFLs, and all that are in bed with these. We say on Empty the Bench, are in bed with these gambling companies.
How
many times do you see on not just MMA shows, but on any sports show, the DraftKings, the FanDuel commercials,
every single day, multiple times a day, and multiple times during the same event, every single day.
Yeah, how many times do we get interrupted during the commercial break with the DraftKings commercials with John Anik?
Literally every event.
Or with Jesse Caulfield, every event.
True.
Yeah. I think that hopefully, for the sake of the things, for the sake of his own reputation and everything, I feel like I agree with you. Krause needs to come clean and figure out explain what the hell's going on here.
Yeah, because I think I'm just as confused as you at this point. So
and potentially disappointed, because, like you said, Krause is one of the most well-respected coaches in this game.
100%, and he has a lot of good fighters to back him also. So it's also, it comes into the question of a loyalty perspective as well. So, yeah,
for sure,
it's very interesting in a story that anyone who cares about the sport should not remain silent on if they aren't already.
Or if you're not talking about it on social media, at least read up on it.
Right.
Let's talk briefly, by the way, Zain. Let's go back briefly to Bellator. So let's talk about the championship fight between Vadim Nemkov, Corey Anderson. So, Zain, turns out Corey Anderson cost himself a championship and $1 million after all with his sportsmanship earlier this year, which breaks my heart, because I thought it was one of the sweetest things. But yeah, I guess there's just no room for sweetness in mixed martial arts, unfortunately.
No, unfortunately, MMA is a mean business sometimes, and no offense to Corey Anderson, but it literally came back to bite him in the ass this past weekend because if we're being honest, Tom, I'm sorry, but I don't think he fought that well. I think he was super complacent. He tried to use his wrestling to his advantage, and it didn't work.
0 for 15. They said in the broadcast, 0 for 15 in takedown attempts.
0 for 15 on takedown attempts, and I was super close to where I could hear both corners. And when I tell you how many times his corner literally said, "Let his hands go," or "Let your hands go" was an infinite number. I cannot tell you how many times that was said, and he just couldn't seem to get off first. Vadim was able to do whatever he wanted to him, won the fight easily. I had no issue with the decision whatsoever. The crowd seemed to not like it very much, but obviously because Corey Anderson's the hometown guy and everything. But it was not the fight that I was expecting. But I spoke to Vadim and I asked him, what changed from fight 1 to fight 2, and he said to me verbatim that he wasn't physically prepared, and that tonight, meaning Saturday, he was, and that's the reason why he won. And because he was physically prepared, he was able to follow the same game plan that he attempted to implement in the first fight, but because he was more ready to go, he was able to do it with ease, which is exactly what he did. So
absolutely. It just seemed like he was, like you said, the more better prepared fighter. It seemed like both kind of went in with the similar kind of strategies that they were from the first fight, and that put into the champion's favor a bit, considering that fight, like we mentioned, at 277 in April, he was down, and he looked like it could have been a finish at that point. That Corey Anderson could have been walking away that night, the $1 million champion. Granted, in the circumstances of that fight, the headbutt.
So now, in looking ahead, Vadim Nemkov will now fight Yoel Romero February 4th in Los Angeles.
That's going to be quite insane.
Yeah, not only that, the top 2 fights on the card are ridiculous because in the main event, you have Fedor's retirement fight rematching Ryan Bader, which is going to be massive. And you have the co-main event, which is Romero and Nemkov. You couldn't ask for 2 bigger fights to not only take place, but to air on CBS for the first time in over a decade.
Yeah, actually, makeshift banner time. Yeah, I definitely something that we passed over, but definitely needs to be talked about. CBS, for the first time since Strikeforce Nashville in 2010, Bellator or any mixed martial arts on CBS. Actually, I was trying to think, is this because it is the first time since Strikeforce Nashville on CBS. Kind of like what I said in the Outsiders Moment of Mayhem this past weekend that I did on it. We've actually seen, Zan, I hope you agree, I think more and more network television embracing MMA. Because, CBS quickly got rid of Strikeforce after the whole Nashville brawl that I like to quote weekly on this show about how sometimes these things happen in MMA. All the testosterone building, and gentlemen, we're on national television.
Absolutely.
But then the next year you have the UFC signing a deal with Fox, and then UFC, embracing Fox more until the end of that television deal. And then at the start of 2021, ABC gets involved, of all things, ABC. And you saw how much, I'd say ABC embraced it even more when we saw the pay-per-view prelim cards this past summer. And we saw on the exclusive ABC card, like it was one card on ABC where Anik and company, Anik and the commentary team, Olivi, and I think it was Felder or Cormier or both, they had the gold jackets from the old Wide World of Sports days.
Yeah, I think it was Cormier who was there with them. But what I was going to say too, something we didn't mention was now, I don't know if you noticed, it seems like all of the number of preliminary cards are moving over to ABC now with the simulcast on ESPN. So it's becoming a newer tradition, which
when possible. Obviously, we haven't had it in a while because it's college football time.
Right. For sure. But yeah, Bellator being back on CBS, gigantic. I mean, they're not going to have much to compete with because it's the week before the Super Bowls. Well, this was great marketing by not only Viacom but Bellator to get this date in place. And Tom, if this isn't like a gigantic success, I will be very, very disappointed because it's shaping up to be exactly that, a gigantic success. By the way, I got clarification from Coker himself. I asked him another question at the scrum. I asked him, where will the undercard be shown? And it'll be exactly like every other undercard. The
On
undercard
YouTube?
will be streamed on YouTube or Pluto. I was hoping that maybe it would go to like Showtime Extreme or Showtime, but apparently,
Or the CBS Sports Network, which used to host Bellator.
right. Unfortunately, none of those options are on the table, so they're gonna keep doing what they've been doing with the prelims, and it's supposed to be. I have to remember. He said it's gonna be 3 fights on CBS, and there's and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but they're still figuring out what fight number 3 is gonna be.
Correct. We have the Fedor fight, Fedor's retirement fight as the main event. Then Vadim Nemkov, Yoel Romero for the light heavyweight titles, the co-main event. The third fight's still TBD. Quickly before we move on to the co-main event of Bellator 288, Zan, thoughts on Fedor getting a championship fight for his retirement fight? We've seen we've seen previously a couple of fighters get title fights for their retirement fight. GSP in 2017, granted, nobody really said it was going to be his retirement fight at the time. The year before that, Dan Henderson unsuccessfully challenged Michael Bisping for the middleweight title at UFC 204. What are your thoughts on retiring fighters getting a title shot in their last fight?
Good question. I'll put it to you simply. This is a business decision, okay? Scott Coker and Fedor have been working together for over a decade now. There's no way there wasn't going to be gold attached to this main event, especially them coming back to CBS with a bang. They weren't going to give people a non-title fight that nobody cared about. Does the fight make sense? Probably not. Like realistically, from a rankings perspective and whatever. But at this point, money's going to trump everything. And hell, if I'm Fedor, I want a chance to have a Bellator belt on my mantle that I can say that I've won every major title in MMA except for obviously the UFC Heavyweight Championship. And honestly, as much as people somewhat hate it, I don't, because it's an interesting fight. Bader won the first one in shocking fashion. It's going to be a very interesting rematch. He's had a lot of time to prepare since number one. That fight was now several years ago, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I actually like Fedor to win his retirement fight in LA and to ride off into the sunset. And it's no disrespect to Bader at all. I just think this is his seminal moment, and I think he's going to take advantage of it in every way possible. And the forum is going to be rocking at night with fans from both sides.
And I think that's the thing, Zan, and that's part of the reason I'm questioning is because we haven't been in a situation where, we haven't had a plan B because, GSP retired with the whole colitis after that. But you know what? Robert Whittaker was the interim champion at the time, and GSP and Whittaker were in negotiations for the fight. So we just simply moved Whittaker up into the, we promoted him. Dan Henderson was unsuccessful. We haven't seen a fighter, a champion compete for a championship, defend against a retiring fighter and lose to the retiring fighter, who immediately vacates the championship. Because then come the questions of, do you give the champion who just lost their title a rematch? Or do you pick two new challengers to fight over a vacant champion? We haven't opened that Pandora's box. If Fedor beats Bader in his retirement fight in February, we're gonna open that Pandora's box.
True, and with MMA being the unpredictable sport that it is, it has to happen at some point, right? So you never
You're right.
Absolutely.
All right. Co-main event: Usman or Magomedov, the Tricky Pitbull. If you thought the main event was kind of one-sided, oh man, was this a spanking. This was worse.
Oh yeah. I didn't make it public really all week, but I can tell you with certainty that I knew Nurmagomedov was gonna win this fight and win it in dominant fashion, and he did. I thought he had Pitbull out in the second round. Pitbull's a really tough guy. Obviously he's been a Bellator staple for years now. So we have to give him all the credit. He's one of the best homegrown fighters that Bellator has ever produced, and that Nurmagomedov name, man, is a force to be reckoned with. And I think he's going to hold the belt for quite a while. And he's just one of those guys that, he just doesn't really have weaknesses, and he really just does whatever he wants to his opponents. I mean, it was a masterclass performance by a guy who I don't think is, really well known in the general MMA space. The hardcores know him, obviously, but this guy is just, he's different, and I was more than lucky to be able to be there, because once I saw that these two were fighting, I'm like, this is gonna be Usman's coming out party, and I was very grateful to be able to see it, because he beat one of Bellator's staples, a guy who's a legend in the company, and he did it with literal ease.
Khabib, Usman, and Umar, if you haven't been paying attention on social media, combined 60-0.
Insanity.
That is a family. The vision, the Nurmagomedov vision, is really coming to fruition, and especially when you also consider that the protege, not the family member, but the protege, Islam Makhachev, is also now the UFC lightweight champion.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he is without a doubt one of the best non-UFC fighters on the planet, if not the best in the world right now, that isn't in the UFC. And truly, I would be blown away if he doesn't get signed to the UFC in the next few years, if not sooner, because I think he would be a tremendous addition to an already stacked UFC lightweight division who could easily compete with the top 15 in the sport and probably beat over half of them. So, yeah.
As far as
I'm sorry, but now that Usman has won the title, I'm all aboard the Usman Nurmagomedov train now. I don't care what anybody says. He has to be my favorite Bellator fighter now, without a doubt.
So I'll say, and it helps that he took the picture with you afterwards too.
Absolutely. Now I just can't wait. Now I just can't wait for his next one.
Yeah, well, I was going to get into that. So actually, Bellator MMA just released their new rankings right here. I have on the Twitter. Patricky Pitbull obviously moved down to number 1. Tafik Musayev moves up to number 2. Benson Henderson down to number 3. Alex Shabili is moving up to number 4. Sydney Outlaw moves down to number 5. Brent Primus to number 6. And then, of course, we do have, is the lightweight next for the Grand Prix?
Yeah, and Coker said he would be announcing it within the coming weeks.
So yes, that's definitely something that we gotta keep our eye on.
Absolutely, there's no doubt that Usman will be the rightful favorite in that one. I'd love to see him fight Ben Henderson, because obviously Ben Henderson's a longtime veteran in the sport. Or it would be interesting to see wrestler versus wrestler. Primus versus Nurmagomedov would be very interesting as well.
I would not be surprised, Zain, if that's. I was thinking Benson Henderson, but now you bring up Primus. I would not be surprised if one of those two fights are his first round bracket matchup.
It could easily happen.
I would not be surprised. Let's briefly touch on the UFC. So not too much coverage with UFC recently. Well, and the reason why, Derek Lewis ends up falling ill the day of the event. His fight with Spivak gets canceled in the middle of the card. So Kennedy Nzechukwu versus Ian Cutelaba. The Hulk, it gets moved up from the co-main event to the main event in quick, sudden fashion. Reminds me of the old UFC days when was it Randleman who slipped on the ice and they canceled his fight?
It sure was, and no one knew. No one knew what the main event was in the I don't think until the fighters
until
actually
the actual main event ended. They're like, hey, this next fight's canceled, so good night, everybody.
Yeah, that's bizarre. Was not expecting that when I saw that when it first happened. I didn't think it was real, and I'm like, oh my goodness, they actually announced it on the broadcast, which is pretty crazy. Just briefly on this fight, Njoku masterclass performance, beat a guy that looked in tremendous shape. But honestly, he struggled as of late. That was a must win for Kudalaba.
Yeah, I'm gonna give a questionable take right now. Actually, maybe not questionable considering I think Kutalaba is gonna get cut in the next round of cuts.
I could easily see it. Njoku is a stud. But yeah, he looked great. No offense, but the rest of the card was kind of whatever because it was overshadowed by the night before. And honestly, though, for a main event to be of that caliber, especially with Njoku still working his way up in that division and trying to be a staple, or to get to the top 5 and eventually get a title shot, that was a great showing for him.
Correct. But I think the wind got taken out of the sails of this card once. It was hard to get into, like you said, after the previous night with Bellator, and then just the Derek Lewis pulling out was just a big blow to it.
Yeah, for sure. But hey, as we always say, not every UFC card is going to be the best.
Yeah, this is, and they were talking about it on the MMA Twitter. This is the price you pay for weekly cards like this.
I'm sorry, this is going to be the lowest grade I'll give a UFC since you started this show, but I'm going to go with a D plus.
Yeah, I'd go D range.
Yeah, this was not good unless you were in the Apex and you had one of those VIP packages where you could get all the food you want. And that was probably the highlight of the afternoon, if you will.
All right, then. While we wrap things up, let's talk about the PFL. So the PFL is going to have their championship card this week for the 2022 season. 6 title fights.
Do you want to pull up Tapology?
Yes, I will in a second. 6 title fights. Actually, 7 fights on the main card, because I say main card because it's the first time ever PFL is going to pay-per-view. Actually, they got a banger of an undercard too. But Sam, before we get into the actual fights, let's talk about this. $49.99 is the price tag for the PFL card, which is not even on pay-per-view, ESPN Plus exclusive pay-per-view.
Yeah, I don't know.
This is what I feared, Zan. I said this is something along the lines that I feared a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, I don't know how many times I have to preach to the damn choir, but oh my goodness. I'm sorry. I understand that PFL wants to legitimize themselves, but what the hell are you doing? It's the day after Thanksgiving. It's $49.99. I don't know about you, but this card has barely been promoted. I haven't seen much promotion for this card at all. It's the PFL finals, and you're charging $50 for fights that were behind a paywall to be and with that only caters to the hardcore fan. And I understand they want to try to push Kayla Harrison and Pacheco. I get it, but it's like $50 for only an ESPN exclusive. Like I mentioned back in August, you can't even watch this fight on regular cable, Xfinity, DirecTV, what have you. You can't even have it any other way. It's going to affect so many other things outside of the fight. And I promise you, I bet you most bars are not going to be able to show this fight because it's not a part of a commercial deal. And I just think the PFL is making a huge mistake. If they really wanted to do a pay-per-view, they should have probably moved it to either this Saturday or next Saturday, put it across all platforms. But I just think in the middle of the heat of college football, rivalry week, the NFL the day before, it's just a really hard sell for me to want to.
I'll add to that, Sam. I'll add to that sports weekend. The NHL usually has a big day after Thanksgiving or weekend, Thanksgiving weekend. NBA is going to have a whole bunch of Friday night basketball that night. And also, Zan, there's that, which I failed to state when we were talking about this in the first place. There's this little event that's going on that has a lot of attention across the world, even if not so much here in the U.S. I don't know what's it called.
The damn
This
World Cup.
yeah, a little something called the World Cup. Which, by the way, actually, of the days that you could have booked, you did book the worst day. You know why? Because 8 or so hours before you have the opening for your pay-per-view card, the United States is playing England in one of the biggest matchups of the group stage.
In a game that the USA desperately needs to win after yesterday.
So after all of these sports options, why is somebody going to pay $50 for the number 3 or number 4 MMA promotion in the world?
I'm just going to be super blunt, and I'm sorry if I get hate, but this is a pay-per-view I'm going to have to pay us on purchasing. I know you will, but it's just
I probably will watch this.
It's hard for me. It's hard for me to justify paying $50 when A, there's so many other things that are on, and B, I can watch it other ways that won't be named on this program. But
actually, Zan, I'll actually add one more. I know professional wrestling gets the snub, always gets the hate, but you know what? Those who in the combat world who are professional wrestling fans, you also just paid $50 last week for AEW Full Gear. You're gonna do it again, 2 weeks in a row.
True. And shameless plug, but AEW, for those of you guys who are curious, is at Wintrust Arena. So Wintrust Arena has been killing it lately.
Absolutely. But yeah, I appreciate, I want to help the PFL as much as possible, with this pay-per-view, but they did not do themselves any favors with $49.99 price, a price tag that the UFC had like maybe 10 years ago when they were still on the Spike TV deal.
Yeah. 10 years ago. Oh, and not only 10 years ago, Tom, but $50 for the HD version, $45 for SD.
So, what are you doing? This was a mistake I feared they would make, and they've made it.
Okay.
This is going to be the action might be great, but this is going to be business-wise a disaster.
100,000 under 100,000 pay-per-view buys?
Under.
Agreed.
I think this one goes under.
I fear to even see what the numbers will be.
I mean, I don't know if we even are going to get the numbers because it's ESPN Plus. We rarely get the numbers for the UFC cards when they're on ESPN Plus.
That's true. You never know. Although somebody will find a way to maybe or maybe not leak them out. You never know.
Yeah, I was gonna say, unless, because we only ever hear from the UFC cards if they're really good, unless maybe they have some sort of deal like we think the UFC might have with ESPN Plus, where it's like for a certain amount of they'll purchase it outright and they don't have to worry about the buys. I am excited, however, I will say I still am excited for the PFL because we have some interesting matchups. I think they have made a great card. Let's just briefly go over the card. So PFL Championship, here are the championships. Here's what the order is on my end. So Kayla Harrison, Larissa Pacheco, number 3 is the main event for the Women's Lightweight Championship. Brendan Loughnane, Bubba Jenkins is the co-main event for the Featherweight Championship, which, by the way, if we're picking one of the men's fights to be the co-main event, I think they got this right. I think Loughnane versus Jenkins is the one I'm most excited for.
They totally did. It'll be nice to see the emergence of Aspen Ladd in the PFL too.
Aspen, yeah. So Ante Delija, Matthew Sheffel for the heavyweight championship. In between the fights, we're going to get a break of a non-title fight. Julia Budd, the former Bellator champion, is going to compete against Aspen Ladd. This was supposed to be the Marlon Moraes-Shane Burgos fight, but Shane Burgos suffered an injury. Marlon Moraes will now headline the preliminary card against Shayna Moraes. It's Moraes versus Moraes 2, Electric Boogaloo. Rest of the card, Stevie Ray, Olivier Aubin-Mercier for the lightweight championship, which I'm also excited for. Delano Taylor is taking on Sabadou Sai. I think Sabadou Sai, is he the defending champion for Bellator? I mean, for the PFL welterweight?
Pretty positive, but don't quote me on that.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't him.
Okay.
It was welterweight championship last year. Like now, I gotta look this up. Who won the welterweight title?
I don't remember.
I'll just go for the rest of the card. Sabadou Sai though is taking on Delano Taylor. So Zan, that is, if you remember, the person who sent Rory McDonald into retirement in upset fashion.
I do. What I was gonna say though was
Ha-
that honestly,
having a little.
you
Okay, there we go. There we go.
okay.
One more.
What
One more fight to announce. Sorry, one more fight to announce. Omari Akhmedov, Rob Wilkinson will open the pay-per-view card for the light heavyweight title.
Yeah, that's a solid fight too. There's a lot of UFC veterans in this card, which is interesting. And I was also going to mention too, from a hardcore perspective, this is an outstanding card. I mean, if these fights aren't good like delivery wise, I'll be surprised. Um, yeah,
Oh,
I
and
mean,
I forgot Ray Cooper won. Ray Cooper won the championship again last year. He fell.
mhm,
He fell hard this season, really
he
hard.
he sure did. He was one of the biggest collapses, and so was Anthony Pettis too.
Yeah. Rest of the prelim card, by the way. Look at Natan Schultz, Jeremy Stevens, Magomed Karamov against Gleason Tebow, Dakota Decheva taking on Catherine Karognes. Oh, and then we have Ali Walsh taking on Tom Gracer. This is an interesting one. They got Yajo Ali Walsh.
Mm-hmm. Because Grazer too, this is his professional debut, so it should be interesting. Or no, I'm sorry, I'm it's Reddit. This is an amateur fight, but it's still interesting just given the name in the red corner too. It's a
Yeah,
very
so yeah, because you have Ali Walsh they are the grandchildren of let's say is the grandchild of Muhammad Ali, the one and only.
100%. And
So
Ali and MSG go together, so this makes a lot of sense. So
for
yeah,
sure. So I've already said the fight that I'm most excited for, Brendan Loughnane versus Bubba Jenkins, but um I just want to wrap one more thing off my chest because I know we're going over time and we got to get to best bets. Considering the pay-per-view price, considering the PFL and the bad business decision there, considering all that Kayla Harrison has and what they want to accomplish with the international outreach and such in 2023, the expansion with more pay-per-views and getting out of getting some non-tournament fights featured more. I know Kayla Harrison has the 2 wins. I know she's expected to win. But Zan, if Kayla Harrison does not win this fight, that will be not just one of the most. That will be to the PFL what Kimbo Slice Seth Petrozelli was to Elite XC. I'm calling it right now.
yeah. Unfortunately, I think you're right, but we won't have to worry about that because Kayla Harrison's going to easily win.
Are you sure about this? Do you remember what you said about Alex Ferreira?
Yes, I do remember that I said about Alex Burr. I just don't. I'm sorry. I just don't see how Kayla Harrison loses. I really don't. Losing is not an option for.
I
Kayla
mean,
Harrison.
Zan, neither do I. Sorry, Zan, but neither do I. I'm just thinking of the implications. There goes the PFL's big money expansions. There goes the potential fights with Cyborg and Nunes. Like that, this will be damaging if she loses. I don't think she's going to, but it's like you think of that. It's back in the mind. The what if?
Yeah, it is a what if, and MMA is crazy, but not this Friday. It's not gonna happen. I'm not
Let's do
worried.
some.
I'm not worried. All I can tell you though is if Pacheco makes it past the second round, buckle up because there's gonna be some craziness if she can survive 2 rounds of this fight. Then you're gonna get into danger zone territory if that happens, in my opinion.
All right, let's talk about some best bets. So, any favorites you have on this card?
Blood versus Lad to go the distance.
I will agree with you on that one. I do think Bud versus Ladd goes the distance. I think Ladd, it's going to be interesting. We've seen Ladd compete at bantamweight, and I think featherweight is going to be a much better. Featherweight's going to be a much better fit for. I just completely realized, this is going to be a featherweight matchup, even though the women's division in the PFL is at lightweight.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to be interesting.
I like Longning versus Jenkins, to end inside the distance with Longning coming out on top. I think he finishes him late.
I don't know if I want to put a bet on that one. But I definitely think if there was a way to bet, for fight of the night, performances of the night. Obviously, I know that's more of a UFC thing, but still, I think Logname Jenkins is your fight of the night.
Interesting. I'm going to predict something crazy, and I don't know which fight it's going to happen in, but given how weird this PFL card is shaping up to be, there's going to be a disqualification in one of these fights.
Can you bet that? Just not for a particular fight. Can you bet a DQ happens on a card?
No, you have to pick a certain fight.
I feel like you should be allowed for something weird like that.
Do you understand my reasoning as to why I feel that that could happen?
Because sometimes these things happen in MMA.
Yeah.
I want to have a look at Delija and his finish record, because let's see, ground and pound. I mean, all right, too many unanimous decisions for me till safe. But I'm betting on a finish on that one.
Wait, can you scroll up a little bit, please?
I will go with Delija, however, too. What's happened?
Oh, I just said on Delija. I was wondering, could you scroll up a little bit?
Oh, I apologize. I'm having some technical issues with the screen here.
Sure.
But anti-Delija, so he has 6. He's 6-2 in the PFL. 50%.
Yeah,
finish,
I just wanted to verify.
A little too close for comfort for my book.
Yeah, I just wanted to verify that Ferreira was his last fight, and sure enough, it was. So, yeah.
It was. He did lose to Bruno in last year's title fight. I will say, as much as I'm questioning the finish, I do think he gets the job done. So I wouldn't mind going. I would not mind going with a money line. Anti-Delija takes home the PFL heavyweight title this year.
My last best bet is a pretty easy one. Kayla Harrison by submission. Just in general, she's gonna submit Pacheco like she does the majority of her opponents. So
that's interesting you bring that up, Zan, because actually the 2 times she fought Pacheco in the 2019 season, they were decisions. It was a 3-round decision, a 5-round decision.
No, I know. I'm just saying the majority of her opponents she's submitted, and she's done it pretty.
Oh, she has submitted, yeah. Pacheco's the one who's gotten away.
Yep.
So it's going to be interesting to see if she gets a finish on that one. But I am looking forward to the PFL card. I'm just a little concerned with that price tag.
I am too. But overall, though, a pretty dead week in MMA in terms of actual fights. Big week for news. We'll be back next week to preview UFC Orlando and all of its happenings there. And we'll probably end up talking about the Terrence Crawford fight too. But before we get out of here, be sure to like and subscribe. Be sure to follow Tom and I on social media. Again, you can find my stuff at BJ Penn. You can find Tom's stuff at Fansided MMA. And thank you guys again for tuning in to another edition of the MMA Outsiders. We had fun. This was episode 16. Here's to many more, and here's to a solid closeout in what was the year 2022 in this great sport that we call mixed martial arts. So thank you guys again for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. And always be Joe Pyfer and be thankful for Joe Pyfer.
Yes, be thankful for Joe Pyfer, be Joe Pyfer, and happy Thanksgiving. Thank you very much, everyone.